Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the number three team in my NHL deep dive series. It is the defending Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. And people are waiting for this one for a while because the last couple of years I've been kind of low on the Panthers um, when it comes to different things. And this year I'm not, clearly, because they're number three. And this was kind of a turbulent offseason for them. They lost quite a bit from the Stanley Cup team, but they have their Stanley Cup, so that's what matters. And obviously, they're still going to be a really good team. Like they're number three on my power rankings for a reason. So jumping into the offseason, they bring in Thomas Nosek, AJ Greer, and Whistle, and Jesper Boquist. They lose Tarasenko, who is just a deadline move anyway. Oposo, Nick Cousins, Steven Lorenz, Ryan Lomberg, and Kevin Stenlund. I said this group is slightly downgraded just because the Tarasenko loss is there. But other than that, like I think that based on the depth they lost, they got slightly worse. But I don't think it's like a huge difference. Depth wise, this forward core is still pretty much just as strong as it was. But losing Tarasenko is kind of a secondary scoring option. Uh, does kind of hurt them. They weren't able to replace them, at least externally, in that case. Defensively is where this team kind of saw their biggest loss. They bring in Nate Schmidt. They bring in Adam Boquist. This is now the second team, by the way, to bring in two brothers this offseason. So that's kind of a fun little uh, piece of trivia there. Um, and they lose Brandon Montour, which is a massive loss. We talked about Brandon Montour a while ago. Um, but Brandon Montour is a huge loss for this team. They lose Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who was also very good when he was on this team, and Josh Mahara. It's definitely a downgraded system. Losing Brandon Montour on its own makes them there. Um, Schmidt and Boquist is probably a better duo than Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Mahara. So the upgrade depth wise there, but losing Montour and not being able to replace that kind of production is definitely going to hurt them this season. And obviously they lose Stolars, who just talked about in the least video. They don't replace them with anybody externally. So that's a downgrade as well, because Stolars is one of the best backups in the league the last couple of years. Moving on to this forward core, it ranks number one in the NHL. And it is one of, if not the deepest forward cores in the league. It also has that top end, high end talent. It really is kind of the perfect combination of great depth and great high end, top end talent. And that is like it is pretty much the ideal forward core for what I'm looking for based on my rankings. And it begins with Matthew Tkachuk, who has put together two of the best analytical seasons that we have ever seen. Um, his 2 year run here has been um, unbelievable, uh, and it's been just a crazy thing to watch. And the points have been there too, right? Like his counting stats have been there. The old time fans love him because he's gritty and he battles in the corners and he hits people and he's tough. And the stat nerds love him too because he does all the small things that get him, very good underlying numbers. And the point people love him because he puts up good points. So he kind of makes everybody who watches him and enjoys his game happy. Unless you just don't like Matthew Tkachuk because he's a Tkachuk. Then I don't know what to tell you. But overall, like he is just one of the best complete players in the NHL and absolutely deserves to be in the A+ conversation. Absolutely deserves to be in that group because he has been again in that conversation for the best winger in the NHL the last couple of years, and especially post Florida Panthers trade, he has just been unbelievable. Alexander Barkov has also been one of the best centers in the NHL. His defensive game, despite what a lot of people tell you, has actually just started getting better now. He used to be more of an offensive center. At least based on his underlying numbers. He obviously had the face-off wins, and people love that and the takeaways. But from an actual like shot suppression standpoint, those numbers really started to kind of turn around recently. And recently, I mean, in the last like 3 or 4 years. Um, but I mean, yeah, he's become one of the better two-way centers in the NHL for sure. And I mean, his offense numbers have always been super underrated, and I think that's kind of what's been forgotten about with him. And I feel like obviously he's got the Selkies, but I feel like the Selkie has always been kind of a most underrated center of the year award rather than best defensive center or best defensive forward because it hasn't been. But that's a whole nother argument. That's for another video. But anyway, Alexander Barkov, super good player. Um, deserves to be in that conversation. And I mean, Sam Reinhart. Now, Sam Reinhart was an interesting one to rate because he had the 82-point season his first year in Florida. Then he went down to mid 60s last year, and then he had the crazy 50 plus goal season this year. So I put him in the A. I put him in the A category because of his last season, right? His last season boosted him to the A category. Do I think that he repeats what he did last year? No, probably not. But the point of these rankings is to grade them based on what they've done. And based on last year, Sam Reinhart absolutely deserves to be in the A category. If you want to put him in the A minus category, go ahead. Florida's still the best offense in the NHL. It doesn't drop them below that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But for me, he was good enough last year to deserve to be in the A category. His underlying numbers looked really good. The year before, if it was the year before, he'd probably be in the A minus, B plus even range. But last year was so good that I didn't have a choice but to lift him into the A's. His numbers matched a lot of the players in the A, both from a counting stat perspective and from an underlying perspective. So, do I think Sam Reinhart has another 57 goal or whatever it was season? No, but if he does, good for him. I mean, I like Sam Reinhart, so it's not a shot at him at all. Um, Other than that, I mean, the depth on the team, Carter Verhaeghe is another guy who just Carter Verhaeghe has been one of my favorite players. I mean, he is the perfect analytics darling player, right? Like you talk about guys like Valerian Nichushkin, you talk about the Arteri Lekkonens, the Blake Colemans from a couple of years ago. But Carter Verhaeghe is like the perfect version of that type of player, where he just does everything really well, and he doesn't get a lot of credit for it. I mean, he's the fourth best player on this team, and he's an A minus. Like it's crazy how deep this team is. I mean, you look at the rest of the roster. I mean, their whole middle six is B's. It's just like this team is just the waves just end, and that's how they when you watch them last year in the playoffs, right? And obviously you lose Tarasenko, which I mean, you throw Vladimir Tarasenko into this top nine on that third line, and it's insane. I mean, you like it's this team's super deep, and it still is, but the thing that Florida did so well last year in the playoffs is they were just able to roll four lines and really roll three lines. And their fourth line was good enough that it kind of just, it got the easy matchups, but they were just able to come at you in waves. And it was like a constant attack. And that's how they were able to just dominate everybody throughout the entire playoffs. And I don't see anything changing with that. Like this offense is still built very similarly to do that. So for Florida, I think that's definitely the strength of this team is this offense and just the way that they are able to just constantly attack. And they have so many guys who just are able to, for lack of a better word, to battle and to get those loose pucks and to be super annoying to play against. But they do it in a way where they're also productive, right? It's not like they're just physical for the sake of being physical. They're physical in a way that allows them to open up for scoring chances and to suppress chances against. And that's why they're so effective because it's not just that, right? And that's the mindset that a lot of teams like it's a copycat league, right? So a lot of teams are going to be like, oh, we got to get more physical guys. Like, well, no, you have to get guys who are effective. And Florida has done a perfect job of finding guys who are a pain in the ass to play against, but are also insanely effective at doing it. And that's the thing that makes this offense so incredibly unique and so hard to replicate. And that's kind of what Tampa Bay did with their, middle six when they won cups, right? I mean, you had guys like Blake Coleman, you had guys like Barclay Goodrow when he was, at the peak of his powers. You had the Yanni Gourds and stuff, and these guys who were pain in the ass to play against, but they're also super effective. And that's what Florida's done extremely well. That's what a lot of teams who are just going to try to copy them aren't going to be able to do. And that's kind of the difference, right? Like that's the nuance that elite teams understand and average to bad teams don't. You look at the rest of this bottom six. I mean, Sam Bennett, same thing. A guy who really broke out once he came here to Florida, kind of came into his own. Somebody I wasn't a huge fan of in Calgary, but he came over to Florida and he's looked exceptionally well. Anton Lundell is another super interesting player. He's somebody I could see taking another big step this season. He's looked pretty effective as the a third liner on this team, and he's not going to be asked to do a lot more than that because of how good this top six is. I mean, Evan Rodriguez, another player I love. Like it's just this whole team is just filled with guys that I love. I mean, I could go on and on about guys like Evan Rodriguez and Carter Verhaeghe forever. Um, that's what this team is. I mean, Jesper Oquist on the fourth line is a good fit. I don't love Entwistle and Novak, and I think that's maybe the area of concern is just trying to fill out the fourth line. But even then, I mean, those aren't guys that um are going to be necessarily like detriments to this team. They're not as effective as everybody else. But the top nine on this team is so good that it doesn't even matter. Like it's almost like it doesn't matter because even if you have an injury to the top six, you have so many guys who can just slide up and fill those roles. And it's like the way this team is built, it's like their fourth line is the weakest point, but it's like it doesn't even matter because their top nine is so effective that yeah, it'd be nice to add another fourth liner, and they might be able to do that. In terms of a trade or something, throw a fourth round pick at somebody, get yourself, a more productive, fourth line right winger. But it, it's kind of just overkill at that point, right? I think there's bigger issues on this team, and there is issues on this team, right? I'm not saying this team is without flaws, but it definitely offensively, I definitely don't think that's where you need to be concerned about in terms of an issue. And we jump to the blue line here, and this is a blue line that obviously we just talked about losing Brandon Montour. They rank number 20 for me, and it starts with Gustav Forsling, who I feel like people have been overrating because of his playoff success, but we're underrating before the playoffs, right? Like A is where I'd have him. I think he's in that fringe A player category. I don't think he's a solid A player, but he was good enough in the playoffs. He was good enough last year that he deserves to get that rating. Again, it's a fluid system. He could drop, having to become the true number one guy because Brandon Montour was there too, and Brandon Montour really helped kind of boost that up. Aaron Ekblad's kind of the wild card in this team because if he can be healthy and he can play, a large role for this team that he's going to have to play this season, and if he can do it effectively, then that really allows this team to have two top end defensemen. If he can't do that, this blue line could be in trouble because behind that, I mean, you have Nico Mikkola, who I like, but he's not a second line defenseman. You have Adam Boquist, who again I like, but isn't a second pair defenseman. You have Nate Schmidt, who was a third pair D in Winnipeg, and was in and out of the lineup. I think he was a little undervalued because of his contract. Again, I think he was one of those players that just fell into the he's overpaid, not bad. And you have Dmitry Kulikov, who again is somebody who like 4 years ago said he was ready to retire. So I look at this blue, and there's not a ton of excitement below those top two. Gustav Forsling rocks. Um, and Aaron Ekblad is pretty good if he can be healthy and he can play. But other than that, there isn't a ton of like this guy's really going to have a great season this year. Adam Boquist running the power play. I like Adam Boquist. Adam Boquist is kind of the one guy on this defense that I think if he could shoot up and have a breakout season, especially running the power play, um, that would really help elevate what this blue line can do. But this is definitely the area for concern. And going through this series, like even like the best defenses, like you really don't see, you really only you see the best defenses only really have, 4B level players and everybody else is kind of below that. Like there's kind of a shortage of elite defensemen in the NHL. Or at least like elite as in like top four guys. Like there isn't a ton of Ds who have actually all four of those guys in there. And maybe that's just a flaw in my rating system. Maybe I'm rating people too harshly. I don't know. That's something to look into. But overall, like I feel like overall my defense rating has been fairly consistent. At least for where I have players. But it's interesting to kind of note that it seems like a lot of teams kind of need that defensive help. And you see defensemen going for first round picks like crazy at the trade deadline, and maybe that's why. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's a fine blue line. The offense is going to be the key for this team. And the thing about this blue line too is like possession wise, they should be fine, right? Like they have, Mikkola has been a fine possession player. Adam Boquist has been a pretty solid possession player. Nate Schmidt was okay in Winnipeg. Kulikov's been pretty solid at that. And I mean, Ekblad and Forsling, like they're going to be fine pretty much everywhere. So at least for like what this team's trying to do, right? We talked about this with Carolina. What the team's trying to do, like I feel like the blue line is better than some of its parts, where they have guys who kind of fit that role. But I also feel like they're kind of scrambling a little bit. With the Nate Schmidt ad and the Mikkel and the Boquist ad. Like I feel like Boquist was a good ad, but it seemed like Florida didn't really know what they were doing with the blue line. And we know they were kind of in on Jeff Skinner. They missed out on that, obviously, to replace Tarasenko. So I feel like they kind of missed the boat on some of these defensemen this year, and it is definitely the weakest aspect of this roster. And finally in net, we have the goalies. I have them tied for 13th. Sergei Bobrovsky's been awesome. I mean, the last couple of years he's been phenomenal. Even last year during the regular season, he was really solid. He's had inconsistencies in the past, and I feel like having a less stable backup this year might regress him a little bit because he's going to be asked to do more, and having Stolars there really helped take a lot of that burden off of him. But keep in mind that going to the playoffs 2 years ago, Sergei Bobrovsky was the third string goalie on the team, right? So it's really hard to kind of tell what you're going to get from Bobrovsky, because that was literally 2 seasons ago. So it's giving him an A had to happen because the playoff run 2 years ago was fantastic. Then last year he was just a rock the whole season, and then in the playoffs he was pretty awesome too. So I had to give him an A, but that concern is there. For among the A goalies that I have, I'm probably the most concerned about Sergei Bobrovsky falling back. Spencer Knight is kind of the wild card here. Now I gave him a D minus because he did play 2 of the last 3 seasons, but he had a negative goal saved above expected during that time, and he didn't play any of last year. So I was really close to giving him an F just because he didn't play last year and because his last couple years before that weren't great. He's hovering around a 900 save percentage both seasons, negative goal saved above expected both seasons and total, obviously. But I couldn't say that Spencer Knight is a non NHL goalie at this point. It just didn't make sense. So he barely got into the D minuses. It's a very much a I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully he can come back and play really well this season because I like Spencer Knight. Hopefully, he's got himself in a good spot and he's ready to go. But it's definitely a question mark for me. I think the blue line is the worst group, but I think the goaltender might be the biggest question mark for me on this roster. Obviously, the offense is going to be great. And the offense being what it is there. They have stars. Obviously, Bobrovsky has proven that he can be, in that best goal in the world conversation any given night. Gustav Forsling has proven he can be a number one defenseman now. Can Gustav Forsling do that without having Brandon Montour there to help him? I don't know. That's what we're going to have to find out. Florida seems to think so. But the thing about this team is that they have their two weakest groups. Offensively, they're going to be totally okay. But everywhere else, they have these question marks and they kind of are just going to let people get thrown into the fire and see what happens. That could potentially lead to disaster. I think they'll be fine. Um, Obviously, I have them as the third team in the NHL right now. So I really like their roster. But that is a concern. I don't know if this team gets the 3 straight Stanley Cups. That's a huge ask to begin with. Obviously, Tampa Bay just did it, but that's kind of the biggest thing for me is I don't know if this team gets out of the East, which is loaded, and we still have 2 more East teams to talk about. But on paper, this offense should be good enough to dominate during the regular season. The question is, can they fill the holes everywhere else on the roster before the playoffs come around? Bill Zito's done a pretty good job so far. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully he can do that. And obviously Paul Maurice is there, who's been fantastic since he came into Florida. So you might be wondering, well, this team's third, but they have they're 20th and 13th in a couple groups because they get the coaching multiplier with Paul Maurice, which I've talked about a couple times. I haven't really covered coaches a whole lot in this, just because the way I'm doing it right now is super in depth, and I'd rather wait till I'm able to go more in depth on coaching. But there is a coaching multiplier to every team. And Paul Maurice is in that highest tier. So that is definitely helping where they are currently in the rankings. But there you go. Let me know what you think of the Florida Panthers. I think they're a fascinating team this season. Coming off the Stanley Cup win, obviously the Lightning were able to win back-to-back. See if Florida can do it too. But yeah, thank you for watching. 2 videos left. This is coming out on Wednesday. So I got 2 days left before the NHL season starts. So we'll see if I can line that up perfectly. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you for team number